Hi everyone. So today we're going to talk a little bit about welding and really give you a little bit of a crash course on some different machines that are out there, and mainly talk about the two processes, MIG and stick welding. Hopefully by the end of today you're more comfortable with the setup of these machines, and then we'll also start some welding, lay some fusion beads, maybe do a butt joint, lap joint, or T-joint, and just show you kind of what that technique looks like. And so I've put out a number of machines here today just to kind of talk you through a few. We're only going to focus on these two here shortly. This happens to be a machine that will do TIG, it'll AC or DC TIG, but it also happens to do stick as well. And so we will use this machine to do our stick welding. This is a dedicated MIG welder, okay? Does nothing but MIG. We could attach a spool gun to it and do aluminum as well, but strictly a MIG welder will use this for that process. And so this is going to be constant current, allow us to do DC stick and set our amperage. This is going to allow us to set voltage and inches per minute in terms of our wire speed, and we'll be able to adjust those based on the thickness of the steel. The other two welders I've thrown out today are really just a little bit for your information. The bottom big one here happens to be a large engine drive welder. And so I put this out as an example, something that's very useful on an equine farmer ranch as well. This happens to be a welder generator, and so this is a 10,000 watt generator. You can run 230, 240 power on it as well as 120, so you can use it all over the farm, and it's also a dedicated stick welder. And so if you're doing a lot of those pipe fences around your property, fixing anything, this is a great welder. This is a 100% duty cycle, and so when we were talking about the fact that you can use this 10 minutes out of 10 minutes, weld all day long, whereas some of these other machines might be 30, 40, 50% duty cycle. That 30% duty cycle machine, again, remembering that max amperage, it can only weld 3 out of 10 minutes and needs to cool the remaining 7. And so this is that dedicated stick welder. This happens to be a small multi-process welder. These are incredible machines now, how small of a footprint they are. They're inverter based, and so you got a number of dials that sit on the top of this. We can do everything from a stick to a flux cord MIG, regular MIG welding, DC TIG. We can weld aluminum with this. We can do it all. And so really cool. They make this kind of a little bit of a suitcase welder. It's portable. You can pick it up, take it anywhere on the farm you need, and it really is a great machine. You'll notice everything I've got out here is Miller or Lincoln Electric. Truly, they lead the industry when it comes to welders and what's on the market. There's a lot of other brands that exist out there. Many others make some good welders, but again, Miller and Lincoln Electric do raise to the top. And so I think with that, we'll put these two machines away, and then we'll start diving into MIG welding first. We'll go over the entire machine, the setup, talk through the process, and then we'll go to stick welding, and again, give you a little bit of a crash course 101 on welding today. And so with that, let's dive into these machines. Okay, everyone, so we're going to start off talking about our MIG welder first. Remember, this is our GMAW, our gas metal arc welding, and just go over some pieces of it. And so we'll go ahead and just kick this machine on right now so you can see it fire up. And so as soon as it fires up, you can see we've got two numbers that are listed. Our left one with our V there would be our voltage. You can see it set on 19 right now, and then our right one being inches per minute, and this would be our wire speed. You can see it listing wire speed and voltage down here, currently set on 290. We can make these adjustments based on the thickness of our steel. And so from this, we have our MIG gun hooked up, as well as our ground. You can see both of those sitting over here. We'll go over the parts of that MIG gun here shortly. Just quickly walking around this welder so you can see the components of that. We'll open up this side door, and then if we open up the side door, you can see inside here we have a spool of wire. And that spool of wire is what is feeding out and basically becoming metal droplets that are going into our crater, and then allowing us to form that weld that is then fusing to the base metal. From that, basically it goes into a series of rollers, and so from this it'll push through that entire hose as well. And so you can see how that's hooked up inside this machine. We've got the correct tension. We can change the tension on this knob right here, and so that's all pretty standard standard inside any MIG machine, okay? Now, the last thing we could adjust that we talked about, if you go to the back, we've got a bottle sitting right here that is a argon CO2 mix, and on top of that, we've got our regulator. And so the tank pressure itself is extremely high, and so this is showing tank pressure, and we need to adjust that down to a line pressure that we can actually utilize. And so that's what this dial is doing on the regulator itself. We've got this set, just shy of 30 cubic feet per hour. We've got it set at about 28, which is just fine for what we're doing. That's going to produce that shielding gas that is going to coat our weld and basically hover over top of it and reduce those atmospheric contaminants such as the nitrogen and oxygen that we worry about. And so our gas battle is already on. You can see our tank pressure. We've got a good regulated line pressure, and we're good to go. And so we're all set up here in regard to the actual machine. The only other adjustment would be the fact that we need to change our voltage and our wire speed based on the thickness of steel that we were going to weld. Some welders, again, inside the door, they are going to have adjustments for you. This one on the 252 happens to be just inside this little front hatch, and so you could easily look at this, say we are welding steel, we're doing a 75% argon, 25% CO2, our wire size is 0.030, and we're going to weld 1/8" steel today with our little tickets. And so we need to be around 18 volts and 250 inches per minute with our wire speed. And so we'll go ahead and dial that in right away, and that's a good starting point. If we need to make fine-tune adjustments, we can do that, but we'll easily just take this to an 18 and a 250, and that'll be a good place to start, okay? And so from there we can close that back up, and we are ready to go. And so we'll get our welding table set up here in front. We'll lay down some beads and basically show you a little bit of that technique. Once we have that gun out on the table, we'll show you the components of that gun as well, okay? And so here we go with some MIG welding. Okay, everyone. So we're sitting down here now at our welding table. We've got everything set up on our welder. We already showed you our correct voltage and our correct wire speed set up for 1/8" steel. Our gas mix is 75% argon, 25% CO2. Flow meter or regulator is adjusted, and it's a good starting point for us to start running a few beads and see how we're doing. And so I've just got a number of coupons, our little weld tickets we could call them. These are 1/8" steel, 4x4, great things to practice on. And so you can do all kinds of different setups and joints with this. We'll again originally work on just laying a few fusion beads down this, and then from there we can work on a few other joints, whether that's a butt joint, meaning we literally just butt these two pieces of steel up together, run a bead down the center. We can do a lap joint, which would be this right here, overlapping, or we could do something like a T-joint, where we're basically doing this 90-degree angle right here, okay? And so we'll do some various different setups, talk about technique as we go through. Because we're using a steel welding table, our ground clamp is connected here to the base of our welding table itself. And so all that steel has to do is just sit onto the welding table, which is really nice. We don't have to take that ground clamp and individually clamp it to our base metal itself. And so that's a whole lot easier if you are able to utilize a welding table. Our MIG gun, real quick, I'll just pull out. And so a few different pieces to this MIG gun just to show you. And so you've got your trigger that sits right here. And inside this, we've got our nozzle. That is this outer copper piece that you see here. And so if we take this nozzle off, you can see that, okay, easy piece. This is what is directing our shielding gas over top of our weld itself. From that inside here, we have our tip or our electrode in here. We can easily change this. This is going to be designated for the wire size we are using. All of these little holes that sit around this are where your shielding gas is coming out from that tank back there, okay? Now, as soon as I pull the trigger, wire will feed out. I'll pull it down and see. And so you can see that feeding out, okay? This wire right here is not energized until I pull the trigger. And so if I touch this steel right now, absolutely nothing happens, okay? If I were to pull the trigger and touch this steel at the same time, it would create an arc and we would start welding. We'll trim our wire back right now, and then we'll start working from there. And so this is where I told you, again, having a set of Mig Welding Pliers is very, very handy. And so this would be a set of those Mig Welding Pliers. We can easily take this and trim back our welding wire, and so this gives us a good standoff with that. These pointed tips that you see here are great for, we'll go ahead and just pull this nozzle right back off. but it gets all kinds of slag built up and spatter inside of it. You can take these Mig Welding pliers and just simply turn this around inside that nozzle and easily get that nice and clean, okay? A whole lot cleaner than it previously was. We can use this little part right here to then get off this tip or electrode if we need to change that out, okay? And we can then use that to snug it down and tighten up. So great universal pliers that you really do need to have around if you're going to do some MIG welding. And so we'll fit our nozzle back on here. We've got our correct PPE that we talked about. So we've got our welding gloves that are sitting right here, more than just your standard leather gloves. And then we've also got our welding helmet. And the nice thing about these auto darkening welding helmets, again, they're adjustable in shade. So when you wear from a 10, 11, 12, this one goes down to an 8. We can easily adjust it to do the process of welding that we are utilizing. And so from there, again, we're going to go ahead and start laying down a few fusion beads. And so we'll kick our other camera on. We'll talk about technique and angle, and hopefully you guys can see that process as we're welding. And so let's go ahead and lay down a few beads. Okay, everyone, so we're going to go ahead and start laying down a few fusion beads, then we'll look at perhaps a lap joint or T-joint as well. And so we've got everything set up. We talked about our voltage is set, our wire speed is set. We got a correct standoff with our wire coming out, as you can see. And so let's just lay a few beads. And you guys will look at it under the welding lens as well and see what that looks like. So cover, everyone. Here we go. So we can see it's a pretty slow process. It's not one of those pull the trigger and just ride right along there pretty fast. Again, MIG welding is a whole lot easier to teach because all you have to do is pull that trigger, maintain the same standoff, and from there go ahead and we're going to pull it along. The key things to remember, we'll lay another bead here momentarily, the key things to remember are 90 degrees to your work and then a 15 to 20 degree angle of travel. And so not down like this, 90 degrees to the work, 15 to 20 angle of travel, and we'll pull the trigger and pull right along. And so let's lay another fusion bead right underneath that one. Cover. And so when we're welding, we're watching that kind of keyhole, that molten puddle, telling us when to advance forward, and again, taking our time. And so now that we've done those few fusion beads, you can kind of see how easily it is to lay down that weld puddle. Let's do something a little bit more advanced now. This will be hot. So let's slide that sucker out of the way. We can grab another one of our steel tickets, and let's look at a lap joint, okay? And so if we take two pieces of steel like this, what is overlapping right now is considered that lap joint. We'll do this, and then maybe we'll look at a T-joint as well. When we talked about some terminology, we mentioned the fact of doing tack welds. So I'm gonna put just a little tack on each side of this to keep that heat from distorting it, okay? And so we'll take this, just simply tack it, tack on this side. And so this is no longer going to bend. Now if we're worried about the back side distorting as well, we could easily take this, okay? And simple as that, we now have basically our entire piece of steel and that lap tacked, okay? And so we'll get that where you can see that under the weld lens in camera. And let's go ahead and lay a little bit of a bead down here. Now, this is going to be a little bit more similar to that T-joint and how we're going to hold that. I can't hold it quite up and down 90 degrees to the work, or we're going to put too much of that heat and weld to this bottom piece of steel. And so this is going to be a similar angle, kind of a 45 degree angle to the work, much like that T-joint, and then a 15 to 20 degree angle of travel, okay? And so let's see what that looks like. Cover. And so we don't need to go all the way down, really, for principle. And so you can see if you watched me, I'm doing a little bit of like a cursive E all the way down. There's different weld patterns that people can do, but it's basically pushing the steel from the top side to the bottom in kind of an even fashion along. We could just keep that steady, and if you watch the remainder right here, what's a little bit left, we could take that and just simply pull the trigger. And we can pull forward and just kind of inch it along the same way. And so it's up to you on how you want to do a pattern, but we're basically pushing that steel right in. We've got great fusion, good penetration. There's no way you're breaking that loose, and we've got a good weld that sits right there. Again, the nice thing about MIG welding, the fact that we've got a gas bottle on there, that argon CO2 mix, is there's no slag on this whatsoever, okay? And so we got again, nice bead that's laid down. We got those half moon shapes. Our speed looks pretty good. And again, there is our butt joint, okay? And so maybe we'll do a quick T-joint, and then we'll move on to our stick welding. And so from here, let's go ahead and just turn this piece of steel around, okay? We'll take one more of our blanks, and let's just set this up as a T. We'll just tack this. So cover. Okay, so we've got that tacked. We'll just tack it on the other side here as well momentarily. Okay, and so we'll try to put this at an angle that maybe everyone can see. It's gonna be a little bit tough from this camera angle. Maybe you'll see it on the other side as we move along. But 45 degrees to our work. And then again, a 15 to 20 degree angle of travel, making sure we don't have any undercut as we move forward. We're just watching that keyhole, watching that molten puddle, and it's telling us when to advance, okay? And so let's give it a go. Cover. Okay, so if we looked at this and now we inspect it as we should with any of our welds, we could very easily take this and see we have no undercut, okay? We've got a good half moon shape, we got good speed. I can tell, especially by our end point, we've got good penetration as well. And so there is our simple T-joint. We can go back and look at those lap joints. Again, we've got good fusion all the way across, all the way back to our fusion beads. It's honestly a lot easier once you start laying down steel for that lap joint or that T-joint as well. If you're doing butt joints, a lot of times just to make it a little bit easier, especially on thicker steel, we'll bevel those edges and it'll make it, again, a lot easier to lay that bead in there versus, again, just laying it on top of the steel. And so very easily, I want you guys to be able to see how you can practice various joints. Pretty easy to change that setup. Again, if we're running too hot, we can make minor adjustments on that welder. Running too cold, vice versa. But you can see those settings that we dialed in basically just off the welder, telling us the thickness of the steel, wire size, and gas we're using. They're pretty spot on, okay? And so let's take a look now at our stick welder that we're going to set up, that TIG machine that also does stick, and then we'll walk you through that process, okay? Okay everyone, so now we're switching gears to our stick welder. We'll go through the process of stick, look at those electrodes again. This is our machine that we're going to use for stick welding. It happens to be a TIG machine. It will also do DC stick as well, which is what we're concerned with, okay? And so you can see there's not a whole lot of adjustments on this. We've got our electrode holder sitting right here, and we've got our ground clamp, which will hook up to our welding table shortly. We've got it set on our DC stick, and we're at roughly 130 amps right now. We can adjust that as we see fit. We're going to be using an 1/8 inch electrode. We're probably somewhere between 125, 150 amps, but we'll see how it's running on our piece of steel. And so with that, there's no other adjustment here, no gas. Again, we're using an electrode that is coated in a flux. It's going to burn off. That's going to protect our weld from those atmospheric contaminants, and we're good to go. So let's move over to our welding table and have a look. Okay, so we're back at our welding table. We just went over our machine that we've got set up to do our stick welding. We've got it set on the correct amperage for now. Again, our ground clamp is already hooked to our welding table, and then we just have our electrode holder. The cool thing about these electrode holders, and so we're going to use these 7018 electrodes right here. Again, the 70 meaning it's a 70 KSI or 70,000 pound brake strength. 1 meaning it's all position, and then the 8 meaning it can work in either AC, or we're going to use it in DC positive. Today we're going to use it in that DC positive. And so if we open up our electrode holder, we've got a number of different slots that we can set it in here. Okay, whether we want to do it out at a 90, we can put it in here at more of a 45, depending on the position of weld that we're looking at. Now again, this is an all hot system in the regard that as soon as this touches, say, our welding table or our steel blank, it's immediately going to strike an arc, okay, as compared to our MIG gun that basically that wire was not energized until you pulled the trigger, okay. And so a little bit different setup and system with this. And so we're going to go ahead and take one of our steel blanks over here. And I think from now, we'll go ahead and get our PPE on. And so I've got to get my welding gloves on. We'll get our other camera set up, and then let's lay a few fusion beads, okay? After we lay those fusion beads, we'll look at, just like the Mig Welder, a lap joint and perhaps a T-joint, and give you a little bit of the rundown. We do have our wire brush and our chipping hammer, because do remember, once we lay down these beads, we're gonna have a coating of slag on top of it, and we need to chip that slag off, okay? And so let's go ahead and get set up and lay a few beads. Okay, y'all, so we're all set up with our PPE. We've got our welding gloves on, we've got our helmet ready, we've got our electrode sitting in our electrode holder. Same key principles back to the MIG welding and the basics. We're going to maintain 90 degrees to our work, not this way, not this way, and then we're going to do a 15 to 20 degree angle of travel, okay? The trick here with this electrode is the fact that it is a consumable and it is burning up as we're using it. And so we have to keep feeding this electrode into our work as we basically shorten that. Okay, maintain our same distance. This is an 1/8 inch electrode, so we're going to try to maintain a standoff of about an 1/8 inch. Okay, you get too long of an arc length, you increase that arc voltage, lots of spatter, looks really hot. You get it too close, aside from burning it out, you have really low arc voltage, and you'll see that kind of raised weld bead. And so with that, let's go ahead and lay a few fusion beads. Okay, cover. Okay, y'all, so looks good. We'll chip our slag off here momentarily. We're running a little hot, and so I'm just going to turn our machine down. We're at 130 amps. Let's push it down to about 120 or so. And so we're now at 120 amps. Now we can't see and evaluate this weld until we chip this slag off. Notice I've got safety glasses on. This slag is extremely hot when you go to chip it off, and so you need to make sure you either have safety glasses on or you do have your weld helmet down while you're chipping that slag. The last thing you want to do is have that end up in your eye. And so it's not going to take much to be able to get this slag off. Okay? And so we can take this and just easily brush off that slag, and you can see, again, we've got a good bead, we got our half moon shape. We get a little fast here because we got a little hot, and so let's lay another fusion bead down, and we'll have a go at that, and then we'll look at our lap joint and perhaps our T-joint, okay? And so let's try this again with one a little bit lower amperage. Again, that's part of just dialing in your machine and getting used to that, but you can see how easy that was to strike the arc. And so we're going to do the same fashion, okay? 90 degrees to our work, 15 to 20 degree angle of travel. Start to strike that arc like striking a match, and then just move forward. And so we've laid our bead. Again, once that cools just a hair, we can chip that slag off and we can evaluate it. But again, pretty easy to lay that down. It is tougher with stick welding as compared to MIG welding in terms of a learning curve in that process. Let's go ahead and just chip that slag off and see what we're dealing with here. Okay, so again, we can see we've got kind of this nice half moon shape here. Again, get a little bit fast down here with our voltage still a little hot. Let's go ahead and throw this into a lap joint, and then we'll see what it looks like from there. So we've got our two pieces of steel set up for our lap joint. I've got an electrode in here at a 45-degree angle. It's just going to make it a little bit easier to feed this into work. We're going to be about 45 degrees to the work and about 15 to 20 degree angle of travel. And so let's go ahead and run a bead along this lap joint just so you can see what that looks like. And so with that, we got our PPE on. Go ahead and cover, and here we go. Okay, so slag is cooled. We can take our chipping hammer. We're just gonna ever so slightly chip that off. We'll just brush that slag away. Okay, everyone, so we've done our lap joint. Everything looks good. We've got a nice bead that's those half moon shapes. Now let's just show you a quick T-joint. And so we're just gonna tack this on here real quick. And so now that we've got that tacked on there, again, remembering a 45-degree angle to our work and about a 15 to 20-degree angle of travel, okay? I realize this can be hidden a little bit behind the camera, but we'll do our best to show you that. And so we're just gonna go ahead and strike that arc and then just run a quick little bead here, okay? So, with that, cover. Just like that, we've got a nice bead run. We don't have any undercut, and so we still have the slag on there right now. Let's just chip that little bit of slag off so you guys can see that. And so we can come through, just clean that up. And again, you can see we've got a good looking weld down there right now. Good kind of half moon shapes, our lap joint as well as our T-joint, okay? And so again, my hope today was just to give you a little bit of a crash course in welding, how to get everything set up on the machines, the PPE that's required that you need, and also some technique. And so hopefully with that, you guys have learned a bit about the Mig welders and the stick welders and some other processes that might be out there, some basics. It really does just take practice. And so the moment you can get yourself in front of a welder, start laying some of those fusion beads, practice that lap joint, that T-joint, that's what it takes. It takes practice. And the more you do that, the better you will become. Critique your welds, look at them. Are they too hot? Are they too cold? Is your travel speed too fast or too slow? And make adjustments based on that. And you will really become a better welder. And so there's so many countless applications for welding on any farm or ranch, and I highly encourage you to take it up. And so with that, we'll catch you next time. Thanks, y'all.